Las Vegas lights were still glowing when gunfire froze hip-hop history forever. And tonight on Myth Vault, we uncover the full documented story of Tupac Shakur, from the fight inside the MGM Grand to the bullets fired at a red light, the silence that followed, and the investigation that waited decades for answers. This documentary reveals the exact timeline, the real suspects, the mistakes, the witnesses, and the arrests that changed everything. And if you want truth backed by records, not rumors, subscribe, share, and press the bell icon, because this story unfolds layer by layer and every detail matters. What really happened that night, who stayed silent, and why justice took 27 years, is why you must watch until the end. Las Vegas, a championship fight, a gang rivalry, a white Cadillac, 4 bullets, and one of the most powerful voices in music silenced forever, while the world watched and waited for answers that never came. Tupac Shakur arrived in Las Vegas on September 7, 1996, carrying the weight of fame, conflict, loyalty, and danger, and by the end of that night, every one of those forces would collide in a way that no one inside his circle could undo. He was only 25 years old, but he had already lived a life filled with controversy, brilliance, and enemies, created as fast as his music traveled across the world. That night was supposed to be about celebration and power, a public appearance alongside Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records, at the Bruce Seldon vs. Mike Tyson boxing match inside the MGM Grand. The arena was loud, crowded, and tense, and it was filled with rival affiliations that many people ignored, but those tensions were real and waiting. Inside the MGM Grand, cameras were rolling, egos were high, and a moment of recognition would turn a long-standing street conflict into an immediate physical attack that everyone would later wish had never happened. After the fight ended, Tupac moved through the MGM Grand lobby with Suge Knight and their entourage. Among them was Trevon Lane, a known member of the Mob Pirates gang from Compton, California. Lane spotted Orlando Anderson, a member of the rival Southside Compton Crips gang. Months earlier, Anderson and other Crips had allegedly tried to rob Lane inside a Foot Locker store in Lakewood, California, and that unfinished conflict followed them into the casino without warning. Lane pointed Anderson out to Tupac, and in seconds Tupac confronted him directly. He asked Anderson if he was from the South Side, and before security could react, Tupac punched Anderson in the face and knocked him to the ground. The fight escalated immediately. Members of Death Row Records joined in, kicking and punching Anderson as he lay on the floor. The assault was violent, fast, and completely captured by MGM Grand security cameras. Hotel security rushed in and broke it up, but the damage was already done. The fight did not end the conflict. It ignited it. Anderson walked away humiliated, injured, and surrounded by people who would later be named as suspects, and Tupac walked away unaware that this moment had set the final chain of events into motion. Security footage later confirmed every movement, every punch, and every face present, turning a spontaneous assault into one of the most important pieces of evidence in a murder investigation that would stall for decades after the fight. Tupac returned to the Luxor Las Vegas hotel. He told his girlfriend Kidada Jones about the altercation, casually, almost dismissively, as if it were just another moment in a life full of confrontations. He changed clothes and prepared to leave again, this time heading to Club 662, a nightclub owned by Suge Knight, where Tupac was scheduled to perform at a charity event. This decision mattered. It placed him back on the streets of Las Vegas within hours of publicly beating a known gang member in front of cameras and witnesses minutes before leaving. A photograph was taken by Tupac's friend Leonard Jefferson. It showed Tupac sitting in the passenger seat of a black BMW 7 Series sedan beside Suge Knight. Tupac was smiling. No one knew it would become one of the last images of him alive. The car pulled out, joining a convoy of vehicles following them through the city. There were roughly 10 cars in that entourage, filled with bodyguards, friends, and associates. Yet none of them would be able to stop what was coming. That photograph captured calm before chaos, a final moment of confidence before the night transformed from celebration into a countdown that no one recognized in time. At approximately 11 o'clock that night, the BMW was stopped by officers from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Bike Patrol on Las Vegas Boulevard. The reason was simple. The car stereo was playing too loudly, and the vehicle did not have license plates attached. The plates were found in the trunk. The officers released them without a citation after only a few minutes. That stop delayed Tupac's arrival at the next intersection by seconds, and those seconds mattered more than anyone realized. At around 11:15 post-Meridian Pacific Daylight Time, Tupac and Suge Knight stopped at a red light at the intersection of East Flamingo Road and Koval Lane. A car with two women pulled up on the left side, and Tupac leaned out of the window, talking, smiling, and inviting them to join him at Club 662. The atmosphere seemed relaxed. No one inside the BMW saw the white four-door Cadillac approaching from the right. At a single red light, with music playing and windows down, the entire future of hip-hop was unknowingly parked and exposed. Waiting for a vehicle that would arrive without warning, the Cadillac pulled up alongside the BMW. A rear window rolled down. From the back seat, a shooter fired multiple rounds from a .40 caliber Glock pistol. Tupac was struck 4 times, twice in the chest, once in the arm, and once in the thigh. One bullet tore into his right lung. Suge Knight was grazed by bullet fragments in the head. Glass shattered. Screams filled the intersection. The Cadillac sped away into the Las Vegas night. Suge Knight, despite being injured and driving on a flat tire, managed to drive the BMW away from the scene. They were stopped again by police officers who called for paramedics. Tupac was rushed to the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada. As he was carried inside, he reportedly said he was dying. Within hours, he was placed on life support and later put into a medically induced coma. In less than 5 minutes, a public assault became retaliation, retaliation became gunfire, and gunfire became a tragedy that would leave more questions than answers for the next 27 years. This night did not end with the shooting. It marked the beginning of silence, fear, missed opportunities, and an investigation that many believed was already slipping. Tupac Shakur would fight for his life for 6 days. While witnesses refused to speak, leads went cold, and the city that watched him rise now watched him fade. Tupac Shakur lay fighting for his life inside the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada, while the city outside continued moving, as if history had not just been wounded. Doctors placed him on life support machines and sedated him heavily, later inducing a medical coma after he repeatedly attempted to rise from his hospital bed, despite catastrophic injuries. 2 bullets had torn through his chest, one through his arm, and another through his thigh, with the most devastating damage coming from the round that destroyed his right lung. Surgeons removed the lung in an attempt to stop internal bleeding, but the trauma had already pushed his body into a fragile state where every hour carried uncertainty. Inside the hospital, fear was constant, not only of death but of retaliation, because those closest to Tupac believed whoever fired those shots might return to finish what they started. Inside a guarded hospital room, surrounded by machines and armed loyalty, Tupac Shakur hovered between life and death while those closest to him feared the shooter was still free, watching, waiting, and capable of striking again. Turning the hospital itself into another silent battlefield, Kidada Jones visited Tupac and later described how she played the song Vincent by Don Mack leaned beside his bed. She said Tupac briefly regained consciousness, moaning softly, his eyes swollen and filled with mucus. Unable to speak clearly yet aware enough to feel her presence, she told him she loved him. It was a private moment between two people, far removed from the violence that had placed him there, yet surrounded by the weight of a world watching from outside hospital walls. At the same time, members of the Outlaws and other associates took shifts guarding the room, believing that danger had not ended with the sirens. Suge Knight was released from the hospital the day after the shooting. When questioned by police, his statement offered little clarity. He said he heard something but saw nothing. Investigators later admitted his cooperation did nothing to move the case forward. Other members of the Death Row Records entourage also remained silent. Officers openly stated that they were receiving little to no cooperation from witnesses who were present that night. The absence of testimony created a vacuum, and in that vacuum rumors grew while facts stagnated. As detectives searched for answers, witnesses closed ranks, statements vanished, and silence became the loudest response, allowing critical early hours of the investigation to slip away, while evidence cooled and fear dictated loyalty reports. Later emerged that Gobi Rahimi, a Death Row music video director, was told by a marketing employee that the shooters had called the record label and threatened Tupac. Rahimi relayed this information to Las Vegas police, but according to him, officers claimed they were understaffed and unable to act. No attackers ever came to the hospital. Whether the threat was real or symbolic, it reinforced the belief among Tupac's circle that this was not a random act, but a calculated response tied to events earlier that night. Outside the hospital, the city whispered theories while the investigation stalled. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department acknowledged that leads were scarce. The white Cadillac used in the shooting was never recovered. Ballistics alone could not identify the shooter without witnesses willing to speak. One of the most critical people in the convoy, Yaqui Gaddafi, who was riding in the vehicle behind Tupac at the time of the shooting, refused to cooperate with police. He left Las Vegas days after Tupac's death, traveling across the country, and despite attempts by investigators to reach him later, meaningful communication never happened. Every unanswered question deepened the mystery. Every unspoken detail hardened suspicion. And with each passing day, the truth slipped further into shadow, protected not by complexity, but by fear and the refusal to speak. On Friday afternoon, September 13, 1996, Tupac Shakur died. Doctors reported that respiratory failure led to cardiac arrest after the removal of his right lung. Attempts to revive him failed. His mother, Afeni Shakur, made the decision to end medical treatment. He was pronounced dead at 4:03 in the afternoon. He was 25 years old. The announcement sent shockwaves through music, culture, and communities that had grown up hearing his voice speak truths they rarely heard elsewhere. Conflicting accounts soon followed. Years later, a police officer claimed Tupac refused to identify his shooter and uttered a final insult. Other officers, paramedics, Suge Knight, and Tupac's bodyguard disputed hearing those words. The inconsistency became another layer of confusion added to an already fractured narrative. What was clear was that Tupac died without publicly naming who shot him, whether by choice, loyalty, defiance, or physical inability. In the weeks that followed, the investigation slowed dramatically. Sergeant Kevin Manning later admitted that the case stalled early. Witnesses stopped calling, new leads dried up. 1 year later, Manning publicly stated the murder might never be solved. For many, that admission felt like surrender. For others, it confirmed what they already believed, that the truth was known but protected by silence, fear, and missteps. 6 days of survival became decades of unanswered questions, transforming Tupac Shakur from a wounded man in a hospital bed into a symbol of justice delayed, truth buried, and a case that refused to die even when the investigation did. This chapter does not end with closure. It ends with a void. Tupac was gone, but the circumstances surrounding his death were only beginning to unfold. What happened next would involve suspects, confessions, lost witnesses, and investigative failures that stretched across generations. The silence that followed his death was not empty. It was loaded with secrets. As Tupac Shakur was laid to rest, the focus shifted from survival to responsibility, and the question at the center of the case became unavoidable. Who pulled the trigger, and why did the investigation collapse so quickly? Almost immediately, Orlando Anderson emerged as a person of interest. He was the Southside Compton Crips gang member assaulted by Tupac and his entourage inside the MGM Grand just hours before the shooting. The connection was direct, recent, and violent. Las Vegas police interviewed Anderson only once. He denied involvement. No charges were filed. Investigators cited lack of evidence and uncooperative witnesses. To many observers, this single interview felt shockingly insufficient given the circumstances. A public beating captured on surveillance, a clear motive established within hours, and a suspect questioned once and released, forming the foundation of a murder investigation that appeared to stall before it ever truly began. 1 year later, Sergeant Kevin Manning openly admitted that the case had reached a standstill. He stated that witnesses had clammed up and new leads had stopped coming in. This admission was not hidden. It was public. It sent a message that the investigation lacked momentum, direction, and cooperation. A close collaborator of Tupac and a member of Outlaws, expressed frustration and disbelief, stating that law enforcement clearly knew what happened and simply failed to act decisively. His words reflected a broader sentiment within the hip-hop community that the truth was visible but ignored. In 2002, investigative journalist Chuck Phillips published a 2-part report in the Los Angeles Times titled, "Who Killed Tupac Shakur?" After a year-long investigation, Phillips concluded that the shooting was carried out by members of the Southside Compton Crips as retaliation for the MGM Grand beating. According to his reporting, Orlando Anderson fired the fatal shots from the back seat of a white Cadillac. The article detailed how Las Vegas police considered Anderson a suspect, but failed to pursue him aggressively. Anderson would later be killed in an unrelated gang shooting in 1998, taking his version of events to the grave. An extensive journalistic investigation exposed missed opportunities, overlooked witnesses, and decisions that allowed a viable suspect to disappear, reinforcing the belief that the case did not collapse from mystery but from neglect. The second article in Phillips' series was even more damning. It outlined specific failures by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Officers allegedly discounted the MGM Grand fight despite its obvious relevance. They failed to follow up with a member of Tupac's entourage, who claimed he could identify the shooters but was killed before being formally interviewed. Another witness reportedly spotted a white Cadillac matching the shooter's vehicle. Yet that lead was never fully pursued. These were not minor errors. They were critical missteps during the most important window of any homicide investigation. Meanwhile, witnesses continued to disappear. Yaki Gaddafi, who had been in the car behind Tupac during the shooting and may have seen the attackers, left Las Vegas shortly after Tupac's death. Detectives later attempted to arrange a photo lineup through his attorney, but communication broke down. Gaddafi was murdered in New Jersey 2 months later. His death eliminated one of the last remaining first-hand witnesses. Other members of Tupac's entourage later stated they were never shown photo lineups despite being present during the shooting. One by one, witnesses vanished, leads evaporated, and the case became defined not by what was unknown, but by what was never followed, leaving a trail of unanswered questions stretching across years. In 2011, new information surfaced when documents released through a Freedom of Information Act request revealed that the Federal Bureau of Investigation had investigated threats made against Tupac by the Jewish Defense League. The documents showed that Tupac had received extortion threats demanding protection money. While this angle did not directly identify the shooter, it added another layer to the case, demonstrating that Tupac was under multiple forms of threat leading up to his death. The investigation into these threats did not result in charges related to the murder. Years later, Suge Knight introduced another controversial theory. He claimed that the shooting may have been intended for him rather than Tupac, suggesting a staged coup designed to seize control of death row records. Knight argued that Tupac was collateral damage in a larger power struggle. This claim shifted focus but provided no verifiable evidence. It added noise to an already crowded narrative and further complicated public understanding of the case. As theories multiplied, clarity diminished, and the story of Tupac Shakur's murder transformed into a maze of motives, rivalries, and half-pursued truths, each one pulling attention away from the failures that mattered most. By the late 2010s, the case had become a symbol of unresolved violence within hip-hop culture. Documentaries revisited the evidence. Former associates spoke carefully, often stopping short of naming names. The same details resurfaced again and again: the white Cadillac, the MGM Grand fight, the silence of witnesses. Despite decades of discussion, no arrests were made. The file remained open but inactive, a reminder of justice delayed. This chapter ends not with resolution, but with recognition. The investigation did not fail because the truth was impossible to find. It failed because fear, loyalty, and institutional hesitation created a wall that facts could not penetrate. Tupac Shakur's murder remained unsolved, not due to lack of suspects, but due to lack of action. For more than 2 decades, Tupac Shakur's murder lived in the space between rumor and resignation, until voices that once stayed silent began to speak publicly, shifting the case from cold history into living testimony. In 2018, a documentary aired in which Duane Keefe D. Davis, a known Southside Compton Crips figure and the uncle of Orlando Anderson, made a statement that stunned audiences. He claimed he was inside the white Cadillac on the night Tupac was shot. He placed himself in the front passenger seat. He described the driver, the backseat occupants, and the moments leading up to the gunfire. While he refused to name the shooter directly, citing street code, his account was the most detailed insider description ever given. For the first time, a man tied directly to the suspect vehicle placed himself at the scene, confirming long-held suspicions about who was inside the Cadillac and transforming decades of speculation into sworn public narrative. According to Davis, the Cadillac was driven by Terrence Brown, with Orlando Anderson and DeAndre Smith sitting in the back seat. He stated that the shooter was seated in the rear, leaning out of the window to fire at Tupac's BMW. This statement contradicted earlier assumptions held by some investigators, but aligned with the physical constraints described by later witnesses. Davis's account did not immediately lead to charges, but it changed the conversation. Law enforcement could no longer claim a lack of narrative clarity. A living witness had spoken. Additional testimony complicated the picture further. During grand jury proceedings decades later, a Southside Compton Crips affiliate testified that DeAndre Smith, not Orlando Anderson, was the shooter. He explained that Anderson did not have a clear angle to fire because of Smith's physical size and position. This testimony introduced a critical shift. The motive remained the same: retaliation for the MGM Grand beating, but the identity of the triggerman became contested. What once appeared as a settled theory fractured into competing truths, forcing investigators to confront the possibility that they had misidentified not the motive, but the man who pulled the trigger. As these statements accumulated, law enforcement quietly revisited the case. In July of 2023, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department executed a search warrant connected to Tupac's murder at a residence in Henderson, Nevada. It was later revealed that the home belonged to the wife of Duane Davis. The search signaled something that had not happened in years: movement. 2 months later, on September 29, 2023, Davis was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in connection with Tupac Shakur's death. The arrest sent shockwaves through music and legal communities alike. 27 years had passed since the shooting. Many believed no charges would ever come. Davis pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors argued that his own admissions, combined with corroborating testimony and historical evidence, were enough to bring the case before a jury. For the first time, Tupac's murder was no longer an unsolved legend but an active criminal prosecution. After 27 years of waiting, silence broke not through new technology or chance discovery, but through words spoken too freely, pulling a case thought buried back into the light of a courtroom. Court proceedings moved slowly. Trial dates were scheduled, delayed, and rescheduled. Davis was initially held without bail, later granted bail and house arrest, yet remained incarcerated due to other legal matters. In parallel, Davis was convicted in an unrelated jailhouse fight case, a development that underscored his ongoing presence within the criminal justice system. Though unrelated to Tupac's murder, the conviction kept his name in headlines and reinforced the seriousness of the upcoming trial. As the trial date shifted into the future, public attention returned to unanswered questions. Why had it taken so long? Why were these statements not acted upon earlier? Why did it take a public confession for authorities to move decisively? Critics argued that law enforcement had long possessed enough information to pursue charges but lacked the will or cooperation necessary to proceed. The reopening of the case forced a reckoning not only with suspects but with institutional delay, raising the uncomfortable question of whether justice was postponed by complexity or by choice. The narrative continued to expand. In 2024, reports surfaced that Tupac's family had hired investigators to examine a possible connection to Sean Combs, the founder of Bad Boy Records. While no charges were filed and no evidence formally tied him to the murder, the inquiry reflected the enduring belief that larger industry forces may have influenced events surrounding Tupac's death. Allegations, lawsuits, and speculation swirled, but none altered the core legal focus on Davis. By this point, Tupac's murder had evolved into more than a case. It had become a mirror reflecting decades of fear, loyalty, and delayed accountability. The arrest of Duane Davis did not answer every question, but it shattered the myth that the truth would remain permanently hidden. The justice system, long dormant, had finally stirred. What remained was not certainty but consequence, a reminder that even decades later, words spoken in confidence can echo into courtrooms and pull history back from silence. This chapter ends on the edge of judgment. The story was no longer about whether answers existed. It was about whether those answers would finally be tested under oath. As the case against Duane Keefe Davis moved toward trial, the story of Tupac Shakur's murder entered its most uncertain and consequential phase, where truth would no longer live only in documentaries, interviews, or speculation, but inside courtrooms governed by evidence and testimony. Trial dates were announced and postponed, reflecting the complexity of a case built on decades-old events, aging witnesses, and statements made long after memories had hardened. Davis pleaded not guilty, maintaining that while he was present in the vehicle, he was not the shooter. The legal system now faced the challenge of separating presence from responsibility and narrative from proof. After decades of silence and delay, the murder of Tupac Shakur stood on the edge of judgment, where stories spoken freely would finally be measured against law, evidence, and consequence, and where time itself would no longer shield those connected to the crime as proceedings stretched forward. Public interest surged again. For a generation that grew up without answers, the trial represented more than a verdict. It symbolized accountability long denied. Critics questioned whether justice delayed could still be justice delivered. Supporters of the prosecution argued that truth has no expiration date. Skeptics warned that memories fade, witnesses die, and narratives evolve. Yet despite these concerns, the reopening of the case reaffirmed one undeniable fact: Tupac Shakur's death never stopped demanding answers. Parallel to the legal process, new speculation surfaced. In 2024, reports emerged that Tupac's family hired investigators to explore a potential link between the murder and Sean Combs, founder of Bad Boy Records. While no formal charges or verified evidence supported this connection, its emergence revealed how deeply unresolved wounds still cut. The rivalry between East Coast and West Coast rap, once fueled by lyrics and media, remained part of the cultural memory surrounding Tupac's death. Even as the courtroom narrowed its focus, the wider world continued searching for meaning, connecting dots across music, power, rivalry, and fear, showing that Tupac's murder was never just a crime, but a cultural rupture that refused to fade. Meanwhile, Davis faced additional legal consequences unrelated to Tupac's murder, including a conviction stemming from a jailhouse altercation. Though separate, this development underscored his continued presence within the criminal justice system and complicated his legal standing. Sentencing delays and attorney changes further slowed the process. The murder trial itself was pushed into the future, with proceedings eventually scheduled for early 2026. Each delay reignited frustration among those who had waited nearly 3 decades. As the years passed, Tupac's legacy only grew stronger. His music remained influential. His words continued to resonate with new audiences who were not yet born when he died. He became more than an artist. He became a symbol of lost potential, systemic failure, and unresolved truth. The murder case, once considered unsolvable, evolved into a testament to how silence can protect wrongdoing, but also how it can eventually fracture. Tupac Shakur's voice outlived his body, echoing through generations while the question of who killed him lingered, proving that some stories do not end when the heart stops beating. What remained now was not mystery alone, but responsibility. A jury would one day hear the evidence. A verdict would be rendered. Whatever the outcome, history had already recorded the cost of delay. Tupac's death reshaped music, culture, and the public's trust in justice. The trial could not restore his life, but it could finally confront the truth that followed his final breath. This chapter closes where the story began, with a young man whose life ended at a red light and a world still grappling with the consequences. Tupac Shakur was 25 years old when he died, but his story aged with the generations who waited for answers. Justice may arrive late, but the demand for truth never faded. In the end, Tupac's murder was not only about who fired the gun, but about who stayed silent, who looked away, and who allowed time to become the strongest defense. The story of Tupac Shakur does not end with a verdict or a sentence, because some stories live beyond courtrooms and timelines, surviving in memory, culture, and unanswered reflection. What began as a night of celebration in Las Vegas became a moment that reshaped music history, exposed the power of fear and loyalty, and revealed how silence can protect truth from ever-reaching daylight. For nearly 3 decades, Tupac's voice spoke louder in death than many did in life, echoing through lyrics, interviews, and the generations that inherited his words. The reopening of the case did not restore what was lost, But it proves something just as important, that time does not erase responsibility, and truth does not disappear simply because it is ignored. Tupac Shakur was 25 years old when his life ended at a red light, but the questions surrounding that night aged with the world that kept asking them. Justice may arrive late, imperfect, and contested, but the demand for it never faded, and that demand is part of Tupac's legacy just as much as his music. This documentary is built on documented investigations, court records, eyewitness accounts, and published journalism, including reporting by the Las Vegas Sun, the Los Angeles Times, MTV News, Rolling Stone, Billboard, National Public Radio, ABC News, NBC News, Associated Press, and court filings from Clark County District Court. Additional verified information comes from interviews and documentaries featuring law enforcement statements, sworn testimony, and public admissions by individuals connected to the case, along with materials released under the Freedom of Information Act, involving the Federal Bureau of Investigation and its review of threats made against Tupac Shakur prior to his death. Tupac once said that real eyes realize real lies, and decades later, his story stands as proof that silence can delay truth, but it cannot bury it forever. The world waited 27 years for an arrest, and it waited. Because the truth mattered, not just for Tupac, but for what his life and death revealed about power, fear, and accountability. And if stories like this matter to you, if you believe documented truth should never be forgotten, and if you want more deep investigations that cut through rumor and reach the facts, then subscribe, share, and press the bell icon on MythVault, because every story we tell is built to challenge silence, honor truth, and make sure history is never erased.